Welcome to Food Friends, a podcast inspiring home cooks to try new dishes in the kitchen by sharing trusted recipes, tips, and friendship. Hi, I'm Sonia.
And I'm Carrie. We met in Los Angeles over 15 years ago as personal chefs and haven't stopped talking about food since. We're so glad you're here. Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi, Sonia.
Carrie, pasta actually is another food category that makes me think of you because you and your family really embrace pasta nights.
We eat a lot of pasta at my house. But Sonia, here's the thing. I'm always looking for better pasta dishes. And I'm always looking for what are the pasta dishes I forgot that I made that I really love? And then what are some new dishes that I want to make?
That's how I feel too. I have kind of my go-tos, but it's nice to refresh your pasta recipe arsenal. So Carrie, you actually really have already inspired me in the pasta category because for the holidays this year, you gifted me 6 Seasons of Pasta by Joshua McFadden and Martha Holmberg. We love the 6-season series of cookbooks.
Because you gave me the 6 seasons. The first one.
Did I?
Yeah, you gave
I always forget what I give you, but I love that.
You gave me that cookbook. And then I don't mean to put words into your mouth, but I think what we both like about both of these cookbooks is that they really cook the way that we cook. It's by the seasons. Certainly my family eats 6 seasons of pasta.
Yeah, and it's really cool to see pasta addressed in this way. I definitely have been enjoying reading the book. And there's one section I immediately was like, okay, this is the first thing I'm making. There's a whole section on how to make your own baked pasta dish. And one of the things that's so good in this cookbook is he really gets into the nitty gritty of brands of pasta, shapes of pasta, cooking times, how to properly salt your water. And so in the baked pasta section, there's so many micro details about what makes a successful baked pasta dish.
Well, Sonia, I have a confession, which is that I have mixed feelings about baked pastas. Certainly as a personal chef, there were a lot of asks for like a great baked pasta, or can you put a pasta in the fridge and we can bake it on the weekend? And I think the promise of that is often not as good as the reality of a baked pasta.
So let me ask you, where do you feel like, because you and I both love stuffed shells, which is a baked pasta. I think we also both like lasagna, which is a baked pasta.
Yeah.
Are you talking more in the ziti, rigatoni, other kinds of shapes that are baked?
Yeah, I find,
Okay.
because I find that I like my baked shells really garlicky and really spinachy, and I can control that and then put that into the shell and add a little marinara and call it a day. But I think in this ziti category, it's a scoop of pasta, but it often doesn't have a lot of flavor. And so I'm really looking for more of that flavor.
And even Joshua McFadden tells you it's the best way to do it is that you sauce all your pasta before. So it's
I
like,
read
why
that.
wouldn't you just,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's like, why wouldn't you just then have sauced pasta? What do you get from baking it? I have also learned, this was really helpful to me. I think if you're going to make this ahead, the best possible way to do it is to freeze it after you assemble it and not just put it in the fridge. I made 2 different versions of this. One, I made ahead to put in the fridge for a day or 2 before we ate. The other one I froze immediately and then reheated from frozen. The difference between the 2 was significant. The one, I don't know
like
why.
the one that sat in your fridge had less flavor, and the one that you had stuck in your freezer had more.
Yes. And not only less flavor, the one that sat in the fridge texturally was so mushy. And so that wasn't very pleasing.
Right.
Even though I cooked the pasta al dente and did all the things you're supposed to do, it does make sense that you don't want to have that pasta sitting in your fridge too long.
Well, yeah,
because
the pasta will just soak up the moisture in your sauce. And so if you put it in your freezer, it stops it from doing that.
Yes.
Wow.
But the freezer version was so good. So I just want to tell you what I made because I think it's pretty easy with or without a recipe. You just get regular old tomato sauce. I did use Rayo's. I didn't make from scratch. I boiled off, there's this like interesting pasta shape that's like a curly, almost like a megaphone
Oh,
shape.
fun. Yeah, I know that one. Yeah, but
I
really
can't
any
remember the
bite-sized
name.
pasta will
Any
work
bots
here.
you could I think a rigatoni is
Yes.
actually ideal for this kind of dish. I heat up my pasta sauce. I always like zhuzh it a little. I boiled off my pasta. I
Al
also
dente
blanched
though, not all the
al
way through.
dente,
Right.
not all the way through. And before I boiled off my pasta, I took a big bunch of broccoli rabe and I blanched it in the pasta
See,
water, salted pasta
there's the
water.
Sonia edition. That's what I was waiting for. The what kind of vegetable were you throwing in there?
It's gotta have a
I
vegetable.
of course.
And to me, a baked pasta dish is so much better with a spinach or a
Yeah.
green. And so I took that broccolini out. You only blanch it for 1 or 2 minutes. I threw the pasta back in, and then I chopped up the broccolini. I boiled my pasta al dente, actually a little shy of al dente, and then I sauced the pasta out of the broccolini. And then you layer. So you do a layer of pasta in your baking dish. You dollop some ricotta. I like to season my ricotta too, otherwise it can be
Yeah.
bland. And then I add
Do you just add salt and pepper to your ricotta?
yeah, and
Okay.
sometimes I add a little fresh thyme. I like
Oh
that. And you
yeah,
can also
another
do
Sonia
like
edition. I love it.
you do a little garlic, you could do whatever. Okay, so then I did dollops of ricotta. I did shredded low moisture mozzarella, add and a little bit of pecorino or parm. Then I added another layer of pasta, repeat the whole process.
So this is
And
like
I'll,
a you're layering
Mhm.
it like a lasagna, even though it's a
You're laying it
bite-sized.
like
Yeah,
lasagna.
it's like a
Yes.
bite-sized pasta, but you're putting all these little dollops of cheese and cheese that has flavor too. You know, it's not
Yes.
just plain like a plain creamy ricotta.
And he tells you to do this in the book. And it's 3 layers total. Pasta, cheesy, pasta, and then a final layer of shredded cheese and parm. And then you could bake that right away and have a delicious meal, or I would freeze it. And then just knowing that when you reheat a baked pasta from frozen, it will take longer.
Right.
And then you want to keep it covered for at least half the baking time so that it can really cook through, and then uncover it to get it browned.
I think another important tip that is going through my mind right now too is the reminder that a Pyrex does not go from the freezer to the oven. So you want this in
Yes.
either like a really high quality casserole dish, Le Creuset or an Emile Henri, one of those really high end casserole dish, or use a metal baking pan, right?
Or like I've been singing the praises of
Oh,
enamelware.
right.
So
Enamelware. Yes.
it's so inexpensive compared to a Le Creuset casserole dish, and it's freezer safe and oven
And
safe.
oven safe. Yeah, that's a good.
That's it. But you're bringing up a really good point. Do not put this in a
Well,
Pyrex.
because
That is such a good
I
point.
grew up with Pyrex and I have them and I use them, but I sometimes will forget. And even from the fridge straight to a hot oven, those things will break.
Can I tell you the first time I ever cooked for my grandmother, I broke her Pyrex doing
Oh
exactly
no.
what we're talking about. It's the worst feeling in the
It
world.
is because then it also ruins your food and you have to clean out the oven. It's so annoying.
Ugh.
Well, Sonia, I'm glad you talked about your experience with the baked pasta. The first recipe that I wanted to talk about is a little bit of a hybrid. It's called cheesy baked pasta with sausage and ricotta, but I think it's slightly misleading because it's really kind of a one pot dish. You're making everything in one pot and then you're just sliding it under the broiler. This was a dish that we made actually a lot during the pandemic. And basically all you're doing is just sauteing some Italian sausage, any kind that you like that works for you, some garlic, you're adding oregano and fennel, and then you're adding a whole can of peeled tomatoes with their juices and then some crushed tomatoes, which will make it a little bit saucier. And then you add your pasta and you cook it in your pot. And then at the end, you're just adding some mozzarella, some ricotta, some parmesan, some fresh basil, and sticking that under the broiler.
In the pot, or you transfer it to a casserole dish?
No, you don't transfer it to the casserole dish. I usually make this in my cast iron. But if you just have
Oh,
like a heavy bottom skillet that has a straight sides, you can make
yeah.
it in there as well.
It's like simplifying baked pasta. It's so much easier than what I was describing.
Yeah, and you need to give it a little bit of time to simmer and you sort of stir it around, but you're not boiling the pasta separately, which I love. And
That's so
yeah,
great.
and there's not this production. That's part of what keeps me from making something like a lasagna. It seems like such a production. And I did chuckle to myself as I was reading his notes on how to make a great baked pasta because he said, well, if I'm going to do it, I might as well make two, which reminds me of something you always say, which is whenever you make a lasagna, you always make two of them.
I did make 2 of these when I made it. And I think you're right, though. Sometimes you're in the mood to have an assembly project and make a head project, and sometimes you're really not. So having a baked pasta dish that takes out all that complexity, but still has all these flavors. And I would guess that like if you didn't want sausage, you could replace it with something like a sauteed mushroom or just leave it out, right? Because this also has a lot of cheesy
It
elements
has a
to
lot
it.
of cheesy elements of it too. But the thing that I'm also kind of thinking about right now is it's almost Mac's birthday, and we're getting ready to host a dinner for him, just family and a couple of close friends. This is a pasta that I was thinking about making because I've made it before. It's a crowd pleaser. But there's another pasta that's actually not pasta, it's gnocchi. And it's this recipe from Wishbone Kitchen, who I really love her recipes. And she does a baked gnocchi a la Sorrentina, which is essentially, she sort of describes it like a marinara pizza. What I love about this idea of a baked gnocchi that isn't pasta is there is going to be a guest at my house that doesn't really eat gluten. And so I, of course, want to include her in this. They do have gnocchi that don't have gluten in them. I think there's a brand called Capello's that does that. And you're basically doing the same thing. You're just boiling off your gnocchi. You're adding some really great tomato sauce. For this simple recipe, the Wishbone Kitchen recipe, there's a little bit of ricotta. There's a little bit of fresh basil. I could do what you did, which is include some broccoli rabe and then just layer it with some cheese. What do you think? Should I offer that for Mac's birthday?
Well, what I love about the way you're thinking about the menu is you have a dish you already are really familiar with. You've made this ricotta and sausage pasta bake many times. You know it's a crowd pleaser. I'm guessing you can make it ahead too, or assemble it ahead.
You can assemble it ahead and then stick it under the broiler.
Stick in the oven. Okay, so that's perfect for entertaining. And then I love the way you're thinking about your gluten-free guest because they do want to feel included and you don't want to have a separate category of food for them. And also, some people may not want meat or sausage. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone by offering something that's vegetarian that contrasts your meat dish to offering something that's gluten-free for the people who don't want gluten. And I think there are like a couple different potato gnocchi brands out there that don't have gluten. So that makes it really convenient and they're shelf stable, or you get them in the freezer or the fridge aisle. That helps you out too when you're hosting. And the simplicity of it makes a lot of sense.
And I think Mac and I have been having this conversation about the menu and the pastas that he likes. And, you know, he keeps saying to me, I just love a red sauce. That's kind of the go-to when you're thinking about a baked pasta is a red sauce.
It sounds really fun. It sounds perfect for Mac. I know he is a big pasta fan. So naturally for his birthday, you'd want pasta.
Yes.
So there's a recipe I've been wanting to share with you. I don't think we've ever talked about it. There's a recipe for walnut tagliatelle from the River Cafe in London. Do you know about this recipe?
I don't know about this recipe at all.
So there was a show called Mind of a Chef. I think it was on PBS. I loved it. And they did an episode. I'm pretty sure I'm remembering this correctly. That was Mind of a Chef. And it was an episode with April Bloomfield, who is an incredible chef and has a wonderful cookbook. And actually, I once saw her at the Hollywood Farmers Market and it made my whole weekend.
Oh, wow. That's so fancy.
I went up, yeah, I said hello and I felt very happy to say hello. And she was just lovely and kind. And in the episode, she shows us how to make this walnut tagliatelle pasta dish. And it just really enticed me.
Curious, what is in it?
So it's an interesting technique and it's a little bit in the pesto world, but it's not a pesto. You put a big pot of water on the stove and you definitely season it with salt. And in this recipe that I'm going to share from The Guardian, it says to add a splash of olive oil. I would not do that. I don't add olive oil to my water. So
no, and there's a lot of people who say you should not do that for many reasons. So skip that step.
Skip that step. Everything else works. Okay. And then you take your walnuts and you blend them in a food processor with garlic until they're very finely ground. And you also soak some bread in some milk. And then you combine that softened bread by hand with the Word Up walnut mixture. And you make sure it's all kind of mixed together. Then you season it with olive oil and a little bit of lemon. And so it's kind of this incredible walnut creamy sauce that's thickened with bread and nuts. So it's not pure nuts. And I think that's important. It has this mixture of the two. And then you drop your pasta into your water. And then 1 minute before it's cooked, you add spinach to your pasta. So you're just blanching it with that pasta. Wow. And then you drain it. And while it's holding, you quickly take that walnut sauce and you just heat it up in a pan. And then you can add your pasta to that warmed up walnut sauce, which only takes like a minute or two to warm up. Right. And then you're making this sauce and emulsifying everything together. And so it has the creaminess of the walnuts, the brightness of the spinach. But this is really a pretty quick pasta dish.
I love this idea. It really sort of turns pesto on its head because there is this green element to it.
I think that little pop of green is actually, it's not in the sauce. It's to complement the pasta. So it gets sauced in the walnut mixture.
Right, right. I love that this whole episode isn't about Mac's birthday party, but he loves what he calls green pasta, which is the very famous kale mixed with some pasta water, some garlic, a little lemon. We throw a lot of Parmesan in there. And to me, this sounds like a really fun pasta dish that I could also include at his birthday.
Oh, yeah, a completely different flavor profile. And it's just, again, taking different techniques and mixing up the ingredients can be really fun.
Yeah. Well, Sonia, I'm also thinking about a sausage ragu. Have you ever made a sausage ragu, which is, by the way, different than a bolognese?
I have not made a sausage ragu.
I've made this sausage ragu a couple of times. It's a recipe by a chef named Sarah Jenkins, and I think her mom is also credited, Nancy Harmon Jenkins. But it was adapted by Julia Muskin for the New York Times. It's interesting. It's a lot different than a bolognese. You're not adding a cream or a whole milk, which often happens with a regular bolognese. The other part of it that's really interesting to me is that you start with sausage in the casings. You put them in a skillet over medium-low heat. And it says that you really want to cook it gently. So you want to fry the meat gently and not steam it, but you only want to kind of cook it until it turns opaque for like 5 minutes. And then you start adding your onion, carrot, celery, parsley, and add a little more oil if the pan seems dry, but you want to cook it very, very low because you don't want to dry out this sausage.
Why wouldn't you remove the sausage from the casings?
You are removing the sausage from the casings. So I'm sorry that was unclear. The recipe calls for Italian sausage in the casings. You don't have to use, you could just use ground Italian sausage if you have that. But the idea is that you're not really browning it. You're not getting that reaction. You're really cooking it gently. I've made this a couple times for like a ski weekend. It has that same bolognese comfort, but without all that extra dairy.
I think that's a good point because I think that is what separates a ragu. This is a ragu,
yes,
right?
It's called a ragu.
A ragu from a bolognese. A bolognese is a specific dish, which people fight about how that's made too. But you're right that it almost always includes milk in the sauce, whereas a ragu, it can be made with anything. I've seen rabbit ragus, lamb ragus. So this is purely with the sausage. And I also love the idea that you could absolutely use a chicken sausage if you didn't want to use a pork. Any kind of Italian sausage.
Yeah, any kind of Italian sausage would work. I grew up eating spaghetti with meat sauce, and my mom would just brown a pound of hamburger. She would add a jar of pasta sauce. It always lacked flavor and it always kind of felt dry. And the intro of this recipe is meat sauce is one of the many recipes that Americans cook. And it seems easy. You just do brown the hamburger and add the jar. But it's like, it sort of tastes thin and it's sour and it's dry and chewy. This is a way of kind of preserving that texture of the sausage.
Yeah, but it's still all the familiar ingredients, right? Like onion, carrot, celery, garlic, I imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
And then tomatoes, crushed tomatoes or canned tomatoes of some kind.
Yeah, and the other addition that I really like, this will surprise you, is that there's a big sprig of rosemary, which adds a nice...
That's unexpected.
Yeah, rosemary and thyme. And a little bit of tomato paste. It's lovely.
That sounds like a really great recipe. I need to try that because I love a good Italian chicken sausage. I really do think this would work with that here.
Yeah.
And I've never made a sausage ragu, especially in any kind of colder weather. You're right. This is the kind of meal you want.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take us in another vegetarian direction. We've already talked about Six Seasons, the original cookbook, and we're not sponsored by them. We just happen to love this book. But there's a recipe from there that I've loved for a long time that was also put online by Amateur Gourmet and also by way of Nigella Lawson. I think she also
all these great cooks.
Recipe.
I love it.
All these great cooks. So you know that it's vetted and well loved. It's bucatini with Swiss chard, raisins, and Parmesan.
Those are all things that I love. What kind of raisins?
Golden raisins, naturally.
Yeah.
And golden raisins and Swiss chard also make me think of Italian classic combinations. Swiss chard, you can almost find year round, but it's especially good in the colder months. Bucatini, I love because it's that hollow spaghetti-like tube of pasta.
It has a nice toothiness to it. It's a sexier pasta.
So like all Joshua McFadden recipes, there's lots of great tips and details here. So if you start by soaking your golden raisins in a splash of vinegar and a splash of warm water, just enough to cover them, they're going to plump up while you're sort of getting the rest of the ingredients
And
ready.
it's going to make them a little tangier if you've got a little vinegar in
Yes.
there too. That's nice.
I also like using currants for
Oh,
this. I
yeah.
love currants a lot. And if you put those in vinegar, I like currants and vinegar just to add to salads. That's something we did at our restaurant a ton. It just adds a sweet and sour note.
Yeah.
So you get your pot of water boiling, season well with salt, but not too salty. In fact, they'll tell you not as salty as the ocean because that can get a little too
Too salty.
flavorful.
Yeah.
And then you get a skillet out, you heat up some olive oil, and you add the charred stems to the pan. I love that you use the charred
Me
stems
too.
here.
Because they're pretty.
They're beautiful.
You can also get the rainbow color that's gold and pink and red, and they're gorgeous.
And it's great not to have to waste them. And then you add some garlic to your stems once they're softened. At that moment, you drop your pasta in and you cook it to al dente according to the package instructions. You add a little bit of chili flake to your charred leaves, and you add a ladleful of the pasta water and those raisins that have been soaking. Now, this is like the ending of your sauce. That starchy pasta water is going to help thicken this up, make it glossy. It's going to add something to sauce your pasta with.
It's going to help cook those leaves because you've already cooked the stems. You've sauteed the stems, but you're kind of wilting down the leaves too, right?
Yes, it's going to bring that chili flake, the stems, the garlic, the charred leaves, and everything all together, and the raisins. You're adding everything at once. And then you throw the pasta directly into the sauce. And then you serve it with a grating of Parmesan cheese. I like to do a drizzle of olive oil too at the end, and maybe a grating of freshly ground black pepper or some extra chili flake. And all that green comes through, the little tanginess and the sweetness of the raisins, the saltiness of the cheese. It's just a perfect, comforting bowl of pasta.
That sounds good. And you don't need any meat in that.
I tend to prefer pasta nights to be vegetarian personally. But yes, I don't think that this is something where a meat eater would object.
No, not at all. Well, I have another vegetarian pasta that's also robust. It has a lot of stuff going on in it. We are a family that loves a mushroom pasta. There's lots of mushroom pastas out there. Most of them are not that good. And this is a recipe I want to try. It comes from Food and Wine, and it has an entire pound of wild mushrooms in it. So this is the kind of recipe that you could go to the farmer's market, or if you see those little baskets at your grocery store that just have mixed mushrooms, you get those browned in a skillet with olive oil. Part of the trick of cooking mushrooms is you want them to be dry. You don't want to add salt. You want them to sit. Don't shake the pan. Let them get browned. And then after you get your mushrooms browned and you pull them out of the pan, then you're adding some garlic, some white wine, some butter, some shallots, rosemary, and you're letting that get all merry and happy together. And then you're adding cream and white miso and Dijon mustard. You've got all this garlic, butter, mushrooms, shallots, and then adding some miso, some white miso, is an addition that I wouldn't necessarily think of, but it sounds like that would up the umami factor. And I think the addition of Dijon mustard is nice because it would add a little bit of that tanginess too.
I feel like recently we've been hearing about all these combinations of miso and mustard, and miso and butter, and all these great ways to use up miso, which is just fermented soybeans that are so salty and so nutty and have a kind of sweetness to them too. And miso goes so well with mushrooms.
Yeah.
I would never have thought of this combination of ingredients. I think this is such a fun recipe.
Well, to me, this is also a recipe that's really leans on your pantry. But I think you could definitely I would add some parsley to the top of this. You can juice a little lemon over top of it too. I'm going to try this recipe and report back to you and let you know if it meets my high standards of a mushroom pasta.
I can't wait to hear. So there's this recipe that I don't think we've ever talked about before, but it's kind of a well-known classic. In my head, I think of it as a very vegetarian way to get all the amazingness of a carbonara without any meat and with a little less richness. And it comes from Nigella Lawson. Which, by the way, have we talked about how Nigella is now going to be the new host of the Great British Bake Off? She's taking over for Prue Leith.
Are you serious? I did not know this. You always have the tea.
Well, it was big news. And in fact, my friend Sam, who's been on our show, immediately texted me as well and was like, did you hear the news? And Prue Leith is retiring. She was not fired, which I'm very happy to hear.
Yeah.
But I think Nigella Lawson is an amazing addition to Bake Off. I cannot wait.
I mean, we're huge Nigella fans over here.
Yeah, so this recipe is lemon linguine, and it's all about the technique. And it comes from her TV show, and it's just a very simple but perfect recipe. So you get your water going. going, like in every one of these recipes, and you're going to cook linguine. And in the time your linguine is cooking, all you need to do is get out a bowl and you're adding egg yolks, a little bit of heavy cream, grated Parmesan, the zest of an entire lemon, the juice of half a lemon, and salt and pepper. So it's similar to how when you're making carbonara, you get your egg yolks and your Parmesan and your cream, if you're using cream, going, and you have that ready in a bowl. And then when your pasta is ready, you take out a mugful of that pasta water and you slowly drizzle it into your mixture.
You temper
and
it a little bit. Yeah.
And you temper it a little. So then what you do is you can return that pasta to the pot where you drained it from. You add a little butter. You toss the pasta in butter first, and then you tossed it in the sauce. And the egg yolk cooks with the residual heat, and it's been tempered a little bit with that hot pasta water. It's truly the technique for a kind of carbonara, but now it's a lemony, creamy, kind of light but rich pasta at the same time.
I really love that idea. Pasta can often be so heavy, and especially a carbonara. And I think there is a richness to this, but the idea of adding all that lemon and that brightness, that's a great vegetarian option.
And it's like a little bit fancy than just squeezing a bunch of lemon and Parmesan into pasta, which also is good.
Which is also delicious, yeah. Speaking of lemon, Sonia, there's this chicken piccata pasta that I noticed in Food and Wine that I really want to try. I'm such a fan of chicken piccata. I had a client who would always ask me to make it for his birthday. What you do is you get a hot pan going and you brown pieces of chicken. They do call for boneless, skinless chicken thighs, which I think I would use. But one of the commenters was like, I'd rather use boneless, skinless chicken breast because it's lighter. You want the chicken to have a little bit of time in the pan because you really want to have those pan drippings, which is really builds the flavor for this pasta. So you get your chicken browned, you pull that out, you add garlic, crushed red pepper, some white wine, some capers, some butter, and some lemon, all the usual suspects of chicken piccata. And you add your chicken back in, you add your pasta in, you toss it all together with some Parmesan and a ton of fresh parsley. And it's one of those really great weeknight. You've got your chicken, your pasta, you've got this bright flavor from the briny capers, from the lemon, from the parsley.
Yeah, I think chicken piccata is such a familiar dish, and having it combined into one kind of pasta dish, it's also a great sell. You can imagine serving this and people are excited to eat it because it has all those familiar ideas, but it's combined together.
Well, and there's one detail that I forgot to mention, which is the recipe calls for that radiatore pasta, which is like a radiator. That shape really holds all those flavors too.
I love that. Well, there's one last pasta I want to talk to you about, which is one that really stood out to me when I read Samin Nosrat's new book, Good Things. It's a version of something I've also been making in my life. It does have an ingredient that you are not the biggest fan of. It has canned tuna. But I think, for a lot of people,
all right, sell
tuna
me.
Is a pantry staple. So Samin Nosrat's spicy tuna pantry pasta. And there are a couple pantry ingredients that I would say they're not unusual, but they're the nicest version of a pantry staple. So there are some swaps you can make, but I think when you're making a simple pasta dish like this, actually splurging on the good versions will make it taste that much better. This dish is made with anchovies, garlic, Calabrian chili paste, but they say you could use crushed red pepper flake if you really can't get Calabrian chili paste.
But that would add a lot of great flavor.
It would add a lot of great flavor. It is more available now than it used to be, but also it's a pantry pasta. If you don't have it, skip that. And then tomato paste, canned cherry tomatoes, which I love to have on hand too. I love those little, if you can find them, they are now also more available, canned little cherry tomatoes as opposed to plum or whole San Marzanos.
I've never seen those before.
There's a Moody brand that you can often find even at Whole Foods. And if you can't find canned cherry tomatoes, use canned tomatoes. That's also fine. Right. And then jars specifically of oil-packed tuna. And I think this is where it matters as opposed to water canned tuna. And if you can splurge on a good Italian oil-packed tuna, if you're gonna splurge, this is the place to do it. But I've certainly made this with just a regular old can of tuna and it works too. And it's just about making a very simple sauce where you're sauteing some onion, adding some garlic to it, adding some anchovies, chili, and tomato paste all at the same time. You let that darken a little and get fragrant. So then you're mashing up your anchovies, and you can also get your pasta boiling at this point. Once your anchovies have all melted down with the tomato paste, you add your canned cherry tomatoes. You let those start to cook down. While your pasta cooks, they're going to get jammy. And then at the very end, you add the tuna to your sauce. And then you kind of toss this all together. together. You can add some lemon zest, some parsley at the end. I think you could also add a grating of Parmesan here. But the idea is to really coax out the flavor from the chilies, from the tomatoes, and combining that with the tuna. And it's so satisfying, so kind of rich. Again, it's another one of those rich but not rich dishes because it has that oily tuna, but tuna is sort of lighter in nature in general.
Well, I have a question. This might be a dumb question, but if it's tuna packed in oil, are you draining off that oil or are you adding a little bit of that? I mean, some of the oil is going to get in there, but are you adding all the oil?
She does call to add a little bit of the oil to your sauce. I think this is a personal preference here. You could also saute your onions and garlic in that canned tuna oil.
Yeah, that would sort of concentrate that tuna flavor as well.
Absolutely.
Well, maybe I'll try that recipe. Sonia,
but
I'm not
why?
a tuna pasta person.
And here's the thing. We just talked about 9 or 10 other ideas that sound fantastic. So that's quite a bit to choose from. I don't think everyone has to make tuna pasta, but I think if it calls to you, I really like this version of it.
Well, I'm glad you brought it to the table today.
Well, this was fun. Until next
time. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being our food friend.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please subscribe, leave us a review, and share this episode with friends. We love hearing from you, so follow us on Instagram or drop us a line at foodfriendspodcast.com.
Yes, we'd love to hear from you and your food friends. Happy cooking and eating!